Welcome back to the deep dive. You sent us the foundational sources on biochemistry, the chapter on water and pH.
The one everyone dreads.
Right. And our mission today is to turn what often feels like, the densest part of the textbook into a really fascinating deep dive. We are talking about the most abundant and, frankly, the most critical molecule in your body.
Water.
Exactly.
Water.
And that's the core of it, really. We're not just summarizing definitions today. The goal is to grasp this foundational truth that water's unusual physical structure makes it pretty much the only possible solvent for life as we know it.
Okay, so it's all about the structure.
It is. If you understand its unique properties, its dipolar nature, its ability to form hydrogen bonds, you instantly understand why proteins fold, why membranes form, and, why regulating the body's acidity is a matter of life or death.
And we really do mean life or death. The clinical relevance here is it's immediate. We're talking about a system that requires shocking precision.
It's unbelievable. So give us an example. What happens when the body loses control over just its water balance?
Okay, a great example is nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. So your water balance is regulated by your hypothalamus, which triggers thirst, and also by antidiuretic hormone, or ADH.
ADH tells the kidneys to hold on to water.
Exactly. It tells them how much to conserve. But in this disease, the kidneys plumbing, the renal tubular osmoreceptors, they just become unresponsive to ADH. They can't get the signal.
So the body is screaming, save water, but the kidneys can't hear it.
Precisely. Your body can't tell the kidneys to hold on, so it just flushes away the water it desperately needs. The cells can't manage their internal fluid, their osmolarity. It's a total communication breakdown.
Wow. And the regulatory mechanisms around acidity, they're even tighter, right?
Yeah.
What happens if that tiny perfect window is breached?
It's the definition of fragile. The extracellular fluid pH, though, the fluid bathing all your cells, it has to stay locked between 7.35 and 7.45.
That's an incredibly narrow range.
It is. And if that system, which relies on these incredible buffers like bicarbonate, gets overwhelmed, you have serious metabolic crises. If the pH drops below 7.35, you enter what's called acidosis.
And we see that in things like diabetic emergencies.
For sure. In diabetic ketosis, the body is producing vast amounts of acidic ketone bodies, or severe lactic acidosis, maybe after really intense physical exertion. Your metabolism is just out of control.
And what if the system overshoots and goes the other way?
That's alkalosis. The pH rises above 7.45. And this can happen from something that sounds almost simple, like severe prolonged vomiting.
Really? Just from that?
Yeah, you lose so much stomach acid that the body's entire acid-base balance shifts dramatically. The whole game for all of cellular chemistry is just to stay within that razor-thin 0.1 pH unit range.
Okay, so let's unpack the chemistry that creates this fragility. It all has to start with the water molecule itself, H2O.
H2O.
Our sources describe it as having a slightly skewed, irregular tetrahedral geometry. I think many of us would just picture it as, a simple straight line, but what is it actually doing in 3D space?
Well, that visual of a straight molecule is wrong, and that's exactly what makes water so powerful. The oxygen atom is highly electronegative.
It's an electron hog.
A total electron hog. And because of the two unshared electron pairs on the oxygen, the whole geometry is bent. The two hydrogens are at a 105-degree angle.
So it's asymmetrical.
Deeply asymmetrical. And that means the electrons spend way more time hanging out around the oxygen side.
Okay, so instead of being neutral everywhere, you get this asymmetrical charge distribution. The oxygen side is a bit negative, the hydrogen side is a bit positive.
And you have a very strong dipole.
A dipole.
Exactly. And that dipole gives water its truly remarkable property, an incredibly high dielectric constant. This isn't just a number. You can think of it as the ultimate charge shield.
A charge shield.
Yeah. Water's dielectric constant is 78.5 at body temperature. For comparison, a vacuum is just 1.
So 78 times stronger than a vacuum at insulating charge. What does that charge shielding let water do in a practical sense?
It explains its phenomenal solvent power, especially for ionic salts. Think about dropping a salt crystal, like table salt, into water.
Okay.
The water molecules rush in and use their partial charges to just surround the positive and negative ions. Now, Coulomb's law dictates that the force of attraction between charged particles is inversely proportional to the dielectric constant.
Ah, so because water's constant is so high.
It just crushes the force that was holding the salt crystal together.
Yeah.
It effectively neutralizes it, allowing the ions to separate and dissolve. It dismantles these huge ordered structures atom by atom.
So that takes care of salts. But what about the invisible sort of glue that holds water itself together and lets it interact with all the organic biomolecules? That brings us to hydrogen bonds.
Hydrogen bonding is fundamental to, well, everything. You have a partially unshielded hydrogen, which is already covalently bonded to an oxygen or a nitrogen, and it has this transient interaction with an unshared electron pair on another O or N.
And since water can be both a donor and an acceptor,
It self-associates. It forms these ordered but constantly changing clusters.
and that self-association is why water is so weird. It gives it that high viscosity, high surface tension, and a boiling point that's way higher than you'd expect for a molecule of its size.
Yeah.
But these bonds are weak, right?
Individually, they're extremely weak and incredibly transient. They only last for picoseconds.
Picosecond.
I mean, they require only about 4.5 kilocalories per mole to rupture. That's less than 5% of the energy you'd need to break a real covalent OH bond. But because there are billions of them, constantly forming and breaking, and because water can interact with almost any organic functional group,
The aldehydes, ketones, amines.
of all of them, it just becomes the perfect medium for complex dynamic chemistry.
So if water is the ultimate charge shield and the master of this transient bonding, it has to be dictating the shape of every large molecule inside you.
It absolutely does. Most of your biomolecules, whether they're proteins or fats, are what we call amphipathic.
Meaning they have a dual nature, parts that love water, the polar charged parts, and parts that, hate it, the hydrophobic parts.
Right, and so water is forcing these massive molecules to fold up in very specific ways. If the hydrophobic parts are trying to escape, where do they go?
They must have to hide.
They cluster together and hide on the inside, away from the water. Think of a protein. All the greasy nonpolar amino acid side chains, they get forced into the core of the structure.
And the charged and polar side chains stay on the outside.
They stay exposed on the surface, ready to H-bond with all the surrounding water. This self-association of the nonpolar regions is what we call the hydrophobic interaction.
Okay, here's where I always get tripped up and where the source material is really clear. This interaction is not because the hydrophobic parts are attracted to each other.
Correct. It's not a mutual attraction at all.
So if it's not attraction, what is actually forcing them together?
It's the ultimate expression of water's desire for freedom, for disorder.
For entropy.
Yes. When water molecules are next to a nonpolar group, say a tiny patch of oil, they can't H-bond efficiently in all directions. So to maximize the H-bonds they can form, they have to restrict their own orientations.
So they become highly ordered.
Exactly. Highly ordered water cages form around the oil patch, and this significantly lowers the entropy or disorder of the water system.
And the second law of thermodynamics hates low entropy.
It absolutely does. The system needs maximum overall entropy. So to satisfy the second law, the nonpolar molecules aggregate, they clump up.
And by clumping, they minimize the surface area they expose to the water.
Right. And that frees up the maximum number of those restricted water molecules, which allows the whole water system to increase its entropy. The hydrophobic interaction is basically a sticky illusion, and it's created entirely by water trying to minimize interference from nonpolar groups.
That is a powerful idea.
Yeah.
The structure of life is basically built on water maximizing its own disorder.
In a way, yes.
So besides this entropic effect, what else stabilizes these big folded structures?
Well, you have salt bridges, which are really just simple electrostatic interactions between oppositely charged groups. And then you have van der Waals forces.
Van der Waals.
Yeah.
That's the collective stickiness that happens when atoms get packed really tightly together.
That's a great way to put it. They arise from these transient, momentary dipoles in all neutral atoms. They're individually the weakest force.
Very weak.
Absolutely. They decrease rapidly as the sixth power of the distance, so they only work over incredibly short ranges, like 2 to 4 angstroms. But you have to look at something like the DNA double helix.
Okay.
It's held together by billions of these non-covalent forces working together. The H-bonds link the base pairs, sure, but the crucial stability comes from the van der Waals interactions between the stacked bases.
So like an internal adhesive tape.
A perfect analogy. And the charged phosphate backbone, that's left exposed to the water, which minimizes the repulsive forces between all those negative charges. Water dictates the entire design.
So water doesn't just dictate structure, it's also an incredibly active chemical participant. You mentioned it's an excellent nucleophile.
It is, and a nucleophile is defined as an electron-rich species.
Right.
And water, with those two lone pairs of sp3 electrons carrying a partial negative charge, is constantly on the prowl to attack electron-poor atoms.
Which we call electrophiles.
Correct.
Right.
And when water performs this attack, the result is usually hydrolysis. It cleaves a bond.
So hydrolysis, breaking down big biopolymers like proteins or starch, is generally thermodynamically favored. The broken down products are more stable.
Yes.
And the opposite, synthesis building a protein by removing water, is thermodynamically unfavored.
And that is the core paradox of life. If breaking down our DNA and proteins, hydrolysis is favored, why don't we spontaneously dissolve in the aqueous environment of our own cells?
This is the classic kinetics versus thermodynamics question. If thermodynamics says the value of decay is lower, why aren't we just constantly rolling downhill?
Because of the mountain of activation energy, that's kinetics. Thermodynamics only tells you where the reaction wants to end up, that the products are more stable. Kinetics tells you how fast it gets there.
So for most of our biopolymers, the spontaneous rate is just too slow.
It's way too slow. The energy barrier is too high for it to happen without a push. They are stable only because the reaction is kinetically inert.
So when the cell does need to break something down, it sends in specialized enzymes like proteases or nucleases to clear that mountain.
Right. They lower the activation energy.
But what about the other side of the coin? How do enzymes force that unfavorable synthesis reaction to happen?
They overcome the thermodynamic barrier through coupling. They link the unfavorable bond formation, let's say synthesizing a complex sugar chain, with a highly favorable reaction.
Almost always the hydrolysis of ATP.
Almost always. When you couple those two reactions together, you generate an overall negative change in free energy for the combined reaction, and that makes synthesis possible. They also help by sequestering substrates in their active sites, physically excluding water to prevent premature hydrolysis.
Okay, so the last major concept that governs this whole biological environment is pH regulation.
Right.
And that all starts with the slight ionization of water itself.
Right. Water doesn't just sit there. A small but absolutely crucial fraction is constantly undergoing intermolecular proton transfer.
It's the source of all acidity and basicity in life.
Exactly. A proton gets transferred between two water molecules, transiently creating H3O plus I, which we just call H plus I, and OH. And even though only a tiny fraction of water does this, that ionization is constant.
And if 1 liter of water has about 55.56 moles of H2O, how small is that ionized fraction?
It's tiny. At equilibrium, the concentration of both H plus and OH is exactly 1.0 times 10 to the minus 7 moles per liter. And that lets us define the ion product for water, Kw, which is simply the concentration of H plus times the concentration of OH. That constant is 1.00 times 10 to the minus 14 at 25 degrees Celsius, and it is fixed for every aqueous solution.
And that tiny number, 10 to the minus 14, is the whole reason we use a logarithmic scale. Sorensen's 1909 definition of pH is pH equals the negative log of the H plus concentration.
We use the log scale because it turns those tiny, unwieldy exponential fractions into manageable whole numbers. 2, 3, 7.
Much easier.
Much easier. And because the product of H plus and OH must always equal Kw, we get that essential relationship. pH plus POH equals 14.
If you know one, you instantly know the other.
Instantly.
Let's make that practical with an example from the source material. If you have a basic solution where the hydroxide concentration, the OH, is 4.0 times 10 to the minus 4 moles per liter,
Yeah.
how do you find the pH?
So you first calculate the POH, which is the negative log of 4.0 times 10 to the minus 4. That calculation gives you a POH of 3.4.
Okay, 3.4.
And you immediately know that the pH must be 14 minus 3.4. So the final pH is 10.6. The log scale just took an infinitesimally small number and made it an easily discussed 10.6.
This leads us naturally to the chemistry of weak acids, which is really the chemistry of the body. Unlike strong acids like HCl, which completely dissociate.
Yeah, they just fall apart completely in water.
Most biochemicals, like the carboxyl groups on amino acids, they only partially dissociate.
And the charge and activity of every single protein and nucleic acid inside you are determined by these weak acids and bases, the carboxyl, amino, and phosphate groups. And to quantify their strength, we use pK.
pK, the negative log of the acid dissociation constant, pKi. And the lower the pKi, the stronger the acid.
Precisely. So lactic acid has a pKi of 3.86, which makes it a stronger acid than, say, the ammonium ion, with a pKi of 9.25.
But the really important concept about pK.
Yes, the most important concept is that the pKi is the exact pH at which the weak acid, the protonated species, HA, is present at the same concentration as its unprotonated partner, the conjugate base, A.
They're at a 50-50 balance.
A perfect 50-50 balance. And this relationship is all formalized in the predictive Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. pH equals pKa plus the log of the conjugate base over the acid.
This equation is basically the map to understanding how buffers work.
It is the buffer roadmap. Buffering is the ability of a weak acid and its conjugate base to stabilize the pH against the assault of added strong acid or base.
And we absolutely need this because normal cell metabolism is constantly spitting out acidic byproducts.
Like CO2, which becomes carbonic acid all the time.
So the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation tells us exactly where that buffer system is most effective.
It is. A buffer operates most effectively in the range of its pKa plus or minus 1.0 pH unit. Outside of that window, the resistance just drops off a cliff.
The sources have a great example of this.
They do. If you add a tiny amount of base, 0.1 mEq of KOH, to a solution that's buffered exactly at its pK of 5.00, the pH only shifts by 0.18, barely moves.
Yeah.
But if you add that same amount of base when the solution is already outside the effective range, say at an initial pH of 5.86, the pH skyrockets by 1.69. The protection is it's gone.
That dramatically illustrates why your body's critical buffers, bicarbonate, phosphate, and proteins, they have to be operating maximally right at the physiological pH of 7.4.
They have to be. And finally, the immediate environment of the molecule can even influence its own pK.
How does that work?
So for a polyprotic acid, like phosphoric acid, the first dissociation happens easily. pK1 is 2.15. But once that first proton is gone, the molecule has a negative charge.
And that charge is going to repel the next proton from leaving.
It strongly repels the release of the second proton, forcing the pK2 to jump dramatically higher to 6.82. The structure itself actually modifies the chemistry.
Fascinating.
So to synthesize the core concepts here, water's strong dipole lets it shield charges, making it the universal biological solvent. Its desire for freedom, for entropy, dictates the folding of every biomolecule through the hydrophobic effect. And the precise control of acidity, which is defined by Coady, relies entirely on these weak acid and conjugate base pairs operating maximally near their pKi to prevent total chaos.
Okay, here is the final essential takeaway for you that connects all of these dots. We started by saying the body's pH must remain between 7.35 and 7.45. Why is this specific narrow range so critical?
Well, it all comes back to protein structure.
Because every single protein inside you, every enzyme, has its structure stabilized by those noncovalent forces we talked about, the H-bonds, the salt bridges. And the strength of those forces relies on the charge state of the amino acid side chains.
And those side chains are all weak acids or bases.
Exactly. They only maintain their correct charge when the surrounding pH is close to their own respective pKi. So if the cellular pH shifts even slightly outside that tight window, those vital forces fail, the proteins unfold.
And they lose their function.
Functional competence is lost. Your entire biological function hinges on keeping that buffer system operational and stable.
A fitting reminder of why this foundational chapter truly matters for survival.
Absolutely. Thank you for providing the sources for this incredibly detailed deep dive. We look forward to seeing what you send us next time.